So here we are. Pretty generic looking piece of shoreline here. Goes all the way back into this, along the lake here. Looks pretty similar all the way. Yeah, some hints at some general rockiness. But I wonder, I wish there were some way a person could tell what the bottom structure looked like without having to lug along a sonar unit, because usually when you lug along a sonar unit, you also have to lug along a boat. A little heavy to be dragging along for just some shore fishing. But and yeah, there's some castable units, but with a fly rod those don't work too well either. So other than a time machine, I wonder what we've got to tell. Okay, so plan A was to come out here to the lake and get a couple of videos of flies hanging out of fish's mouths so that I can match those up with some tying videos that I'm working on. But the conditions are pretty lousy for that right now. It's too sunny, the water's too clear, and there's no real wind to speak of, which makes this spot not a real good one for the fish that I was hoping to target and the flies that I was hoping to target them with. However, the lake is about 3.5 feet low, and with the clear water and that combination of exposed bank, there's also to be had here, maybe the fishing's not that great, but there is to be had one really good learning experience about how we can judge bank lines and how we can read water for those of us that don't have the advantage of boats and sonar. So I want to show you a couple of spots and kind of show you a few things about those that mark them as good fishing or not so good fishing, and why we wouldn't have known that unless we saw what we saw with the exposed bank line. So here's spot number one, and the first thing we're noticing here is that from the normal water line, which is what you're looking at right now, down to the water is a fairly steep fall. So we know that we're going to have a little bit of a drop off here when the lake's full, but then we get out here to the water itself. We walk down to the current water line, and that kind of shallows out. So what we've got is we've got a relatively steep fall onto a shallow flat, which is not so shallow a flat. It's about 4 or 5 feet deep when the water's at normal lake level. The other thing that we're seeing that we wouldn't have seen is that when we hit that flat, we also get a big change in the bottom structure. We move from this big rock, this big chunky rock that we could see along the shoreline and would probably assume went out there for a ways. We get out here and all of a sudden we're on gravel with just a few smaller rocks out there for fish to key in on. So what this is telling me that I wouldn't have already known is that this would be a good ambush point if we had a full lake level. The fish would be hanging up in these bigger rocks, ambushing bait fish going out. But it also tells me that out here on this flat, we've got some fairly good crayfish habitat. We've got places where smaller fish would come to feed on insects and things, but we don't really have a lot of ambush points out here. So if we're catching fish, we're probably catching schools of fish that are cruising through hunting other things. And so I know from that I'm probably not going to have to hit this point very hard. I'm not going to have to cover a lot to know whether or not the fish are going to be here. They're either going to be here or they're not. So, like I said, we'd have never known that without having the lake level low enough that we could see, and without taking the time to come out here and walk along the banks and find out what we can find out. Let's go take a look at another spot that's not too far away that's got a pretty distinctly different characteristic. Okay, so here's another spot. This little point here, I always knew this spot was shallow because I've caught a lot of fish here, but I've also lost a ton of flies here. You can see how far it is to the water. I'm standing at what would normally be the normal water line now, so it doesn't drop off very fast going out in there. But what you notice pretty quickly, now that we don't have the water, is that especially in kind of that middle casting distance, we've got a lot of big chunk rock, and we've got a little bit of a depression right there where we've got maybe about a foot and a half more water in there than we would normally have surrounding it. So this is going to be another spot. Always caught a lot of fish in here when the water's a little bit above pool, and now I understand why, because you have all of this shallow area around here with all of a sudden this little bowl that's just that little bit deeper, and sometimes just that little bit is just enough to provide habitat for bait and ambush points for predators. So a little bit of a learning experience here, and as we walk out through this, you can see that you've got a lot of overhangs and a lot of places where fish can get in there and hide. You know, a fish could be laying in there, and a cast would have to just come right past that fish's nose for him to ever know that it was there. There's another cut that would be the same thing. So this is going to be an area that I know from now on that I'm going to really have to pick apart. I'm going to have to put a cast just every few feet all the way through this area until I get out to the longer distance cast, and then I notice that it starts to break up into just kind of smaller rocks. So this is going to be more cruising areas for fish. I'll walk out here to the water line, and what becomes very evident with this clearer water, which is why it's nice that the lake is low and clear at the same time, is that this is going to continue for quite a ways out. I don't know if you can see into the water, especially since I know I've got the sun right in front of me, so we're getting some glare in the image. But this flat just keeps going and going and going with no sign of really getting any deeper. So really not sure how far a person would have to wade out there to get into to find a drop off or someplace where fish would be hiding there. So this one, with the water low like this, I'm probably going to walk right on by. But once the lake fills up, I know that I need to really be paying attention to this kind of this middle distance area behind me. So the moral of the story here is that even if it's not a good fishing day, well, it's always a good fishing day. Even if it's not a good catching day, it can always be a good learning day. So, you know, pay attention, kind of keep an eye out around what's going on around you. Observation is a huge part of fly fishing, whether it be what bug activity is on the water or where fish are likely to be by bank structure or bottom structure or whatever. So, you know, keep your eyes open. If the lake level's not ideal, use it to learn from. Use it to learn from so that when you come back when it is ideal, you can really exploit those spots that you found out about. Really not a whole lot more to say about that right now. I wish the fishing was a little better, but it's not. Beautiful day though, really nice to be out. And learned a little bit about this little patch of bank line that I didn't already know. So hope you guys learned a little bit too. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it interesting. Maybe entertaining, maybe informative. If you did, hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button while you're at it. Maybe even the notification bell. And we'll see you in the next one. Tight lines.